Revolutionary Souljah back again with another reaction. Run it.
I'm Tony Brown, executive producer of Black Journal. Welcome to Black Leaders 73. This program has been pre-recorded, and you will not be able at this time to phone in any questions. The questions that you hear were directed in some instances to specific panelists, and in other instances they were not. Some of the panelists had not been advertised, and we do not have a number of questions for them. However, they have been encouraged to answer any questions, no matter to whom they're directed. For the next 90 minutes, we will present an unedited two-way communication system between you and our Congress of Black Spokesmen. We will be using television as an instrument of positive social reform, allowing Black America to question members of her leadership and make herself heard collectively. Our guests are Judge William Booth, President, American Committee on Africa; Hayward Burns, National Director, National Conference of Black Lawyers; Berkeley Burrell, President, National Business League; Stokely Carmichael, All African People's Revolutionary Party; Angela Davis, National United Committee to Free All Political Prisoners; Fannie Lou Hamer, Director, Mississippi Freedom Farm Corporation; Nelson Johnson, National Chairman, Youth Organization for Black Unity; William Lucy, International Secretary Treasurer, American Federation of Federal, State, County, and Municipal Employees, and the Chairman of the Steering Committee of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists; the Honorable Percy Sutton, President of the Borough of Manhattan; the Honorable Louis Stokes, Democrat of Ohio and Chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus; Cindy J. Williams, Jr., President, National Association of Black Social Workers; and James D. Williams, National Urban League. One of our panelists was unable to be with us and wired us his regrets. The following telegram is from Mr. Stanley Scott, Special Assistant to the President of the United States. I will now read his telegram. Deeply regret that I must cancel my appearance on your show because of an assignment recently given me on behalf of the President. I would welcome the pleasure of being your guest at a later date. With every best wishes for a very successful show, Stanley S. Scott, Special Assistant to the President. Indeed, there are many other Black spokesmen, but our physical and technical capabilities have limited us. We do want the public to understand that our Black leadership does include persons not on this panel. To continue to expose more of our leaders, we have invited a different group from our 1972 version. In selecting tonight's panel, we attempted to bring together a diversity of positions and philosophies, held together by the common thread of concern for all Black people. May we now have our first question.
Black Leader 73, I have to tell you that we are recording a question, and we need your permission to record it and to edit it and to put it on the air.
You have my permission to do that. My name is Carl Smith from Lawton, Oklahoma. A pluralistic society in which all ethnic and racial minorities try to contribute to the mainstream and still retain their cultural identity is often advocated as a desirable goal for our country. My question is it a realistic goal? Is it possible? And if not, why?
If you didn't understand that question, I can read it to you again. He said that a pluralistic society in which all ethnic and racial minorities try to contribute to the mainstream and still retain their cultural identity is often advocated as a desirable goal for our country. My question is it a realistic goal? Is it possible? And if so, and if not, why?
That's one of the diversities that I guess that we have among Black people. I hate to say Black leaders because I don't think of ourselves as Black leaders. I don't think any people.
Yes, you can. You can be whatever you want. You can be a part of the mainstream and still, keep your dignity as a Black person or a black human being or black, keep in the black culture. Some people may think like, okay, you become a politician, you become a police officer, you could become whatever in the mainstream, and they say you sell out. Nah, not necessarily. The only thing, you just don't forget where you come from. And sometimes when you get into those fields and you mix up and mingle with certain people, they can let you forget where you come from and they can try to change you. But if you stick to your roots, you can become a main staple, a main asset to the community, to the black community, to the black culture. So you can be whatever you want to be. You don't have to leave and become, like, to say you're independent, or you could say an entrepreneur or anything. You can be a part of the mainstream and still make a difference in the black community.
Leaders, we are working in the field and we're doing our job. But there is the diverse opinion. Some folks believe that you can work within the system and you can make the system work for you. Others believe you can't work within the system, you've got to have something else. I happen to be one of those who believe that although we have not progressed as we should have, the great masses of the people have not at all been able to use their inner talents, the talents they've got and that have been hidden by reason of cultural bias and examinations and all the rest that's happened to us through the years. But although the masses of the people have not tasted the success that is available here in this country, still I believe that it is possible. If I didn't believe it was possible to work within the system and to retain my own cultural identity in spite of what's happening, I would have to give up my job. I'd have to give up my various positions and organizations that I belong to. I'd have to say, well, down with all organizations connected with this government. So I look upon this government as being one of men who can be changed if there's enough pressure put upon them. And if the numbers that we've got together, that black people have and related people have in this country, we put our numbers together, we can overcome the forces against us. Otherwise, I couldn't exist in this country that way.
I would think that what our brother Judge Booth said is correct. The only question would be what kind of change do we want? I think everybody would be for that society. The question is whether or not it could come about under the present system of this government, or whether that system must be changed. I, for one, believe that it cannot come about under the present system, a capitalist system. That system must be changed. I believe that. And I think that if we have the same objectives, then it doesn't make a difference where we work. As a matter of fact, a man working to change the system with that objective in mind can do very much inside the system, once he doesn't lose sight of his objective. An example that comes to mind is that a few years ago, it was found out that one of the advisors for President Few was working for the Viet Cong.
Same thing I was saying. Once you don't lose sight of who you are, you can work anywhere you want to be. You can work anywhere in the system, as long as you don't lose yourself.
I do think that we make a mistake if we talk about this in terms of absolute doctrines. If we talk about it in terms of black people and integration, or black people and separation. It seems to me that that's a false dichotomy that's been set up in terms of the way in which the debate is discussed. The real issue I feel for black people is one of empowerment and one of redefinition of the way in which black and white people are interacting in society. I feel that's what we must be about.
Well, I think that if you consider the fact that this system, this capitalist system under which we're living today, is designed in such a way that nobody except a privileged few can attempt to express themselves or contribute to anything, there's no doubt about the fact that we have to talk about revolutionizing the system before anybody can live in any kind of human fashion together. I would just like to point out the fact that I have seen with my eyes societies where people of different colors and how to live together, each maintaining their own cultural identity, but each fighting to build and to continue to construct a socialist revolution together. I was in Cuba not very long ago, and I saw with my own eyes how black people, brown people, and white people have reached the point where they can work in harmony towards the building of a socialist society.
Any other responses?
Let me just maybe add to what Brother Brown said over there just a moment ago. I think the key question is that certainly it's a good idea to work toward a total input by all, I suppose, ethnic groups in our society, blacks and what have you. But the key thing is whether or not you have a sufficient amount of power within yourself to affect the system when the system is working against your vested interest. In school some years ago, we were taught to think of America as a melting pot, and I think the current administration has proven that there are ethnics who are unmeltable, because even though they are invisible, they are still there to identify with their own vested interests as a people. I think as black people, we've got to become concerned, first of all, with what our vested interest is in either preserving the system or changing the system. And once we make that determination, then the direction that we have to take is clear for us. For instance, if you look at the various arms or branches of government, they represent different interests.
Check this. You can't change a system. The system is a machine that cannot be changed. What you can do is use the system as a tool to make a difference in your community. That's all you can do with the system. You can't change the system. It's like you're talking to a brick wall. It doesn't go nowhere. Use the system as a tool to make a difference in your community. And don't lose your way. A lot of the people in the black community lose their way when they reach to certain points in their career at certain points in their life. Don't lose your way, that's all.
Yet there is none that represents our interests. For instance, the business interest is represented by a branch. You will never find that branch, going contrary to what the interest of business happens to be. Yet there's the labor interest, and only here lately have we found some differences there. But every segment of our society that represents a power, lever is represented there, except people, and particularly black people. And I think we should be about the business of coming together, not in specifics as to what our interests and goals are, but certainly in generalities in terms of what we need to exist in this society.
Let me ask a question about your comment. Would it be correct to infer from your comments that you would suggest some attachment of a power mechanism for black people to the governmental apparatus as a solution to the empowerment of black people?
No, I think what I'm getting at is the acquiring of power within the black people themselves to affect the system in any way it needs to be affected in order to produce on behalf of the interests of black people. I'm not saying we should have a black agency. That's not what I was referring at all. I'm saying that every other ethnic group in our society has, by some means or other, acquired the power to move out of their depressed or oppressed situation, with the exception of black and brown. I think what I'm saying is that whatever that power has to be to move the government or move local structures, that's what we need to be about. And I think the vested interest should be the basis of our movement.
America really is an ethnic society. And I live here in New York now, though I come from Texas, and New York has always been talked about as a melting pot. It really isn't a melting pot. We have Jews, we have Italians, we have blacks, we have Puerto Ricans, a variety of other cultures that live side by side with each other, not always happy with each other. But if we're talking about change, whether it's a change of the style of the government or an absolute change in the nature of the government to a socialist society or whatever other society, I think the thing that is fundamental to it if we as black people are going to talk about change, one of the first things we need to do is develop some unity within ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean that all black people have to speak the same language or have the same philosophy, but we have to learn to communicate, and I think we are, in a large measure, learning to communicate with each other. And we've got to develop coalitions with others because we're a small minority. We have great power, however, if we can unite our minority with other minorities, because there are other groups of people who would wish to move in the same direction as we wish. So it doesn't make me any difference whether we're going, if I thought tomorrow we could stage the revolution and the revolution would succeed, I would give leadership to it. That is, a revolution by whatever method. But at this structure in our development, I believe the kind of revolution that is going to take place is a social revolution without bloodshed. And if this is to be so, one of the first things that must be accomplished is that black people, poor people, must unite themselves and then join forces with others.
Well, now, Harlem has been a barometer for a number of years of perhaps black feeling across the country in terms of mood. What direction do you see the mood in Harlem going in?
I'm not too sure that Harlem has been the mood of the country. Harlem is one of the most volatile places in the country. When I travel to other places, I'm amazed at the amount of unity. We have unity in Harlem, unity in one thing, that we're different. Many of us are different. We have more nationalist organizations. We have all of the organizations you want to perceive of many of them have their facets in Harlem. No, I don't think Harlem is the mood. Harlem is a very sophisticated place. Sophisticated in the sense that we all understand the need for others of us to exist. So I could not use it as the barometer of America. But if it should be the barometer of America, I think it would be good. But I'm afraid that it is not.
Mrs. Hamer, do you see changes since you're right in the middle of the rural South, do you see any trend there in terms of black people moving toward unity, moving away from unity? Just generally, what is going on in your area of the country?
Well, I do see more unity because the power structures in the South are forcing us to have more unity. You know, there have been a class split with the black community. That's being moved because we are finding out whether you middle class or no class is no different. As long as we black, we in the same boat. And that's forcing us to be together. Because, you know, we've seen what is happening in our schools. You know, like if a principal was a principal and was moved and become assistant principal, his job, if he's black, automatically, if he becomes assistant principal, his job automatically is to carry toilet tissue from one school to the other one and load up the bus. So he's finding that it's no different in us, and it's forcing us to get together. And I think that the change will come because we have to. It's nothing handed to us on a silver platter, and we have to work together for a change in the South.
Congressman Stokes, did your election as the new chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus indicate a new direction? And if it did not, is there a new direction for the Congressional Black Caucus?
Well, what we had to do immediately after I assumed the chairmanship was to try and evaluate our role. We found ourselves at that time being 13 black legislators out of a body of 435 congressmen, and having formed a black caucus for the purpose of trying to alleviate the conditions under which poor and black and disadvantaged people live in this country. We had to try and evaluate that role in terms of 1973 and the United States Congress, particularly in light of the present administration in Washington. As we evaluated our role, we realized that we sort of grew up overnight, and we immediately tried to be all things to all people. And for a period of 18 months, we conducted a series of conferences, a series of hearings around points of interest and concern to black and disadvantaged people in this country. And after we had developed all of the hearings and the conferences, we realized we had a great deal of data collected, a great deal of proposed legislative solutions. And so we realized that we ought to get out of the business of conducting conferences and hearings because we had the data, we had the specifics with which to work, and propose legislation which would get at some of the solutions to some of these problems. So consequently, we decided that we would try and make the emphasis of the caucus that of a legislative thrust, that is to add a black perspective to that legislation coming through the United States Congress, particularly in light of our work on committees, where we can fashion amendments to legislation before it even comes to the floor that would add a black perspective to that kind of legislation. And so it's with this kind of a emphasis or thrust that the Black Caucus attempted to change this direction.
I'd like to ask either Mr. Williams and or Mr. Williams, since the National Association of Black Social Workers is definitely interested in services for black people, poor people, and the Urban League is definitely in the business of institutionalizing services. How do you see the recent budget proposals or the appropriations for these service programs affecting Black America, specifically during the summer months and on into the years?
The way I view it, the current Nixon administration policy is creating or will create a critical condition in the black community. They're cutting back on key services in the area of daycare, welfare, scholarships for students to attend school. Many students would not be able to attend the open school enrollment program, and etc. But even more importantly, currently in the black community, despite the statistics that have been projected by the Nixon administration, see, we made a survey in both Harlem and Watts, and we came up with these statistics that something like 40 to 50% of blacks that are unemployed at this particular time right now. Now, with the current cutbacks, this is going to create even more unemployment. In fact, some statistics have already been thrown out by some of the black groups. There's something like 200 or 300,000 black people working in the poverty program will be affected, that are currently employed, that will be affected by the job cuts. So this is only compounding the current unemployment situation that currently exists now in the black community. So I think that we are now past the repression stage. We're in a critical point, because not only does this exist in Harlem and Watts, it exists throughout the major urban areas in the city. And I think that as black people, we're going to have to begin to speak out against this current trend, because it's having a drastic effect on the black community.
Well, Tony, to respond to that same question, that we do regard the budget cuts as disastrous, but not only in terms of the actual dollars, but the type of philosophy that these cuts have unveiled. That we're talking, well, let's just deal for a moment with the housing programs. We have to admit that some of those programs did not work. But some of those programs did not work because there was fraud involving government agencies, involving...
Can you believe we're in 2023 and these things are still going on? It's like nothing ain't changed a bit from then till now. Can you believe that?
In the private sector of the country. So what happens? The programs are cut out and the poor people are penalized. In other words, that we are being victimized because someone else has victimized us. And the whole question of the cuts deals with the type of philosophy that says the country has done enough for poor people, so now we'll move on to something else. That we can abolish poverty with the stroke of a pen. And so therefore that these programs are no longer needed. And anyone that needs these programs are really freeloaders whom we can do without. So we deal not only with the question of the dollar amounts, but the question of the type of philosophy that's trying to, well, that is being exemplified in this type of approach to the budget. So I think that that's the main thing.
I just want to make one point about the whole budget cutback thing, as we see it, and I think again, we see a rather magnificent PR game being done by the Nixon administration, because the nation as a whole assumes that the cuts that are taking place are, one, to eliminate black people from the rolls, from the welfare rolls, to make life easier for the taxpayers out in the hinterland. But if you really track the statistics and see exactly who is benefiting from the programs that goes down, you will find that generally, 2/3 of the people who receive benefits are white, and the other 1/3 being black. In terms of those who are receiving direct public aid or public assistance, you will find that the number increases to something like 1 out of 4. And I'm not a social worker, but just the pure and simple numbers indicate that. What has happened is that out in the Midwest, where it's becoming acceptable now to assume that discrimination is a way of life, the administration has convinced people that what we're doing is keeping your taxes down, keeping those programs. We're taking those programs out, rather, that have contributed to the inflation and all this other foolishness. I think what we have to do, and I think there's a tragedy that some of the so-called liberals who have participated in these discussions before are not speaking out on the issue now, but it's being left to black leadership to deal with the whole question of budget cutbacks. And I think that there's a real need to raise the level of awareness across the country, because we even got some black folks who are talking about, yeah, well, we should be phasing down these things. Phasing down got nothing to do with it. If you cut back on the social program, at the same time increase the defense budget, when we're supposed to be winding down our involvement in Southeast Asia, there's something out of balance there. And
Tony, I don't think, let me just piggyback what Bill Lucy said. We should not have a discussion. There should never be a discussion of welfare without some explanation to the public of what welfare really is. Lockheed is getting welfare. People who live in the suburbs, Penn Central is getting welfare.
We pay taxes.
Pardon me?
We pay taxes.
Exactly. We pay taxes. They're not only getting welfare, but not paying any taxes. But when they get it, it is called a subsidy. And of course, we could go along and give a really description to all of the things that are being done by our federal government, both here in America and abroad, that are in fact welfare. But Mr. Nixon and his crew are not talking about eliminating any of that. They're talking about expanding that.
Well, let me ask this. In his explanation, as far as he's gone to date, President Nixon, when he appeared on television explaining the Watergate situation as he saw it, did you sense that he was implying a reordering, a restructuring of priorities? When he discussed, didn't he say something to the effect that he was going to be a little more sensitive?
No, you want to know what I sense? I sense that there was a desperate man trying to cop a plea, and then he even said a prayer for us at the end of it. No, I didn't sense that he was talking about reordering priorities. I sensed that he was trying to get through a very bad night.
And I think also that the critical thing about that performance was that he never really got to the substance of what they were dealing with. That what we got was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of waving of the flag, and then you're supposed to go away feeling that Watergate is just going to disappear. And I think that it was an unfair trick to play on the American public.
Well, we are.
It's one thing, I'm sorry, it's one thing, that is the only president in the history of my time, and I'm 56, that can talk an hour and never say nothing.
But we also have to ask ourselves what the real meaning of that Watergate affair is. And I think it's important, especially for those of us who are here this afternoon, to recognize that if the Republican Party will go that far to sabotage the Democratic Party, to sabotage that kind of opposition, what have we already been experiencing insofar as repression is concerned, and what will we as black people have to face in the future? Because there are many of us who feel that not only the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party as well is committed to upholding a system of exploitation and racism. If you look at the McGovern campaign, McGovern didn't even raise the question of racism, and he...
One eagle with two wings, left and right. It doesn't matter what party, they are part of one bird.
He was supposed to be the far left wing of the Democratic Party. So I think it's important to see this Watergate scandal as being an indication of the real threat of fascism.
And I think that's what it is an indication of the lawlessness of law officials and the abuses of state power at the highest level. You have to take it beyond the particular example, as Ms. Davis said, of Watergate, to understand what's going on at all levels in our society as far as abuses of power by the government is concerned, particularly in political areas. If they're doing this against the established opposition, what are they doing against black people? What are they doing against political activists? What is happening with the statutes that are being passed and the people who are being appointed to the courts? the decisions the courts are rendering, what's happening at the street level in terms of the administration of justice, then you get the full impact of just how lawless these people are, who are supposedly in charge of administering the law. When you look at the statutes the Congress has been passing, preventive detention, you see the no-knock, you see the stop and frisk, you see the Interstate Riot Act. You look at the Supreme Court of the United States consistently cutting back upon what we regard as traditional rights in this country, doing away with the non-unanimous jury. When you look at the street level, the level of violence, officially sanctioned violence that's going on in this country, the political implications of that. Look at what happened at Kent State, and Orangeburg, Jackson State, Southern University, at Attica where 43 people were killed. And you look at the way in which the grand jury is being used, and you look at the way in which agent provocateurs are being used, and if you just trace it all the way through, what we see in Watergate is just the top of the iceberg.
Look at what's happening in Wounded Knee right this moment.
I think we could talk for an hour and a half if we wanted to really expand on this point.
Well, I'd like to say this, Tony, that really the American people, should shoulder the responsibility for what is going on now, you see, because the Democrats are just alarmed of the bugging because it's affecting them. You see, the Democrats, when they were in power, they were bugging the black movement, and no one made any kind of outcry about that. The only thing now, the chicken had come home to roost, and though now that they are being affected, they are now beginning to do the outcry. We have been crying about that for years, about the invading of our privacy, the bugging during the civil rights movement, that it bugged Martin Luther King. This was well known, and no one spoke out against it. So what is happening now? See, it has been a revelation of what have been going on for years, and I think that the American people now are becoming more aware of what is going on. Now the fact is what they're going to do to begin to deal with it. But I think that I want to go back to another point also. It's very important who the president has around him. You see what I mean? If he have, let's say, crooks around him, then who only have their vested interest at heart and not going to commit the time and the energy that is necessary to design programs to deal with blacks, then we are never going to get the kind of response from the federal government that we need. And I think that this is very important because these fellows up there are more concerned about stashing suitcase full of money. In fact, the $2 million and $4 million that they're stashing away now, that money can be going into the black community helping to deal with some of the problems. And I think that until we begin to focus on these kind of situations, that we were going to be missing many of the basic points.
Stokely, you've been trying to. Okay. Go ahead. I yield to the elder statement, my elder brother, the business sector of our community.
One of the things that I keep hearing here, and I think you'd have to agree, would be that the capitalistic system in America is the system that we have to deal with, and the problem with it is that we don't have any blacks operating in it. I wonder if we would have the same kind of feeling about the capitalistic system if we were the capitalists and somebody else was sitting outside. I think we would begin then.
I would be against it.
I think that, well, Stokely says he'd be against it, and
Somebody is exploiting me. I don't care whether he's white or black or red or yellow. As long as he's doing the exploiting, there's something basically wrong. It's
difficult, really, to say that people haven't been damaged by the free enterprise system in this country. The failure of our cities is probably a direct result of the failure of the free enterprise system to do something about it. When big business begins to move out and leave poor people to solve the problems of poor people, then you've got a failure.
Wait a minute, you can't, I'm sorry.
All right.
But you can't talk about free enterprise because there's no such thing as free enterprise. Okay. Capitalism in this day and age is monopoly capitalism. It is controlled by multi-billion-dollar firms, multinational firms. It's controlled by the people like Rockefeller and Hughes and DuPont. Now, there's a real difference between those folks and the black man or woman who decides to open up a grocery store on the corner. That is not capitalism. But Richard Nixon has been trying to convince us that all we have to do is to get a little grocery store on the corner, and then all of a sudden we're black capitalists.
Well, if that's what Richard Nixon says, then I disagree with him. I'm not interested in small business in that